If I could have your attention, please. We'd like to do something really important, but we can't do it while people are talking. We're going to run out of time, and then there'll be people we won't be able to hear from. But I needed all of your attention because I'm going to do something really special right now, and I want everybody to be a part of that. So if you're hearing me out there in the hall, let's just give me just a few minutes. I'd appreciate it. You heard us talk earlier about Phyllis Schlafly. She was such an amazing lady. She was a good friend of Ronald Reagan's. In fact, somebody told me one time if you did a Google search, you would probably see, or they did see her name with Ronald Reagan's name more than they saw her name with the ERA, which is crazy because, the name of our organization was Stop ERA to begin with. And Phyllis is just this amazing, amazing woman who did just that. If you can read the history books, she gets all the history. In fact, all the credit for that. They did a movie, a Hollywood movie about her life. It wasn't really the best, but it got a lot of attention to it, and we got a lot of free advertisement, so it was good. It was good. So, what was the name of the actress that played Phyllis? Do you remember? Kate Blanchett. I don't know a lot about the thing, but she played the part of Phyllis. So she was just this amazing lady. And because of that, because she was certainly my mentor, in fact, every once in a while people call me Phyllis. That's the greatest compliment I ever get. Is when somebody calls me Phyllis. I love it. Even though they're always, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, don't be sorry. I'm just grateful. So we decided that we were going to have an award called the Phyllis Schlafly Award. Phyllis left us, about 5 years ago. We just hadn't done that because it's got to be really, really special. It's not going to be one of these awards that, let's just give this same award every year and call it the Phyllis Schlafly Award. This is an award that will go to not a lot of people because it's that special. I might have to have somebody else do this. Sorry. This is a very emotional time for me, so I ask for your forgiveness. But as I was thinking about that, we've had a major change in Eagle Forum, Utah Eagle Forum. And it's big because our executive director that we've had is no longer with Eagle Forum. She made the decision, and a good decision for her to be part of to actually have her own organization, which I always said she should because she's just that good. And you all know her, the legislators all know her. So, Marianne. This is a big deal because Marianne has been with Utah Eagle Forum for over 25 years. That's a long time. She's like my sister. Sometimes we didn't always agree. So I told her, I said, that's because sisters don't always agree, but they love each other even more. So this award, this very first Phyllis Schlafly Award, goes to the first person that I think deserves it. And it's Mary. Of course. Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much. This is so unexpected and so moving to me. I've had it in my mind that I could start my own organization. I'm not actually starting an organization. I'm reviving an organization that Delane helped form back in 2018, and I think we were pretty pivotal in defeating that tax reform bill. So yay to us. And that's the organization I want to revive. So I'm going to be at the legislature, still going to be working with Gail and everybody else. I just wanted to mention my journey, and I wanted you to maybe consider what your journey is. Many years ago, when I was pregnant with my youngest son, some maybe not so bizarre and very, very frightening circumstances caused me to become a lot more aware of what was going on in the country and in government and the things that were going to change. And I felt called. God called me out of the masses to do more. And I have been so eternally grateful that Utah Eagle Forum was a place that I could go and plug myself in. There's so many organizations we work with that have narrow focuses, and Eagle Forum is not one of those. Eagle Forum cared about every issue I cared about passionately. And so it's been a very good place for me to work, and I'm so grateful for Gail and for her leadership, for National Eagle Forum, for Phyllis Schlafly, and for the woman that she was and the example to all of us. And I'm grateful to be moving on. It was a truly, truly difficult decision for me because of my position in Eagle Forum, but I think more than anything, I was over the intern program, and I just loved that so much. Any of my interns, that if you're here, stand up. I love you all. William, see, he went to Washington. We got him started. So I'm really going to miss Utah Eagle Forum, and not so much because I'm going to be at the legislature. We will work together. But I'm going to miss the relationships that I had with those kids. They're just hope for our future. I saw it every day working with my interns. So thank you so much for this honor. It's really an incredible honor. I wish Ron could be here, but thank you so, so much.
I knew that was going to be tough. So let's see. Do we have Rob Bishop? Is he in here or is he still out there? Somebody can grab him. He is. I don't know if you've stopped by Rob's booth out there. He's selling this book that he wrote. It's called The Things I Learned in Congress They Never Taught in School. Now, usually when you hear that, it comes from us as a student. Rob Bishop was a school teacher. And so I think it encompasses all of those things. I love it. I love the title. When he called and told me that he had written this book, I said, oh, you've got to come and speak. You know, he spoke to us how many years? He was always one of our favorites because, you know, right when maybe you were starting to get a little tired, you have Rob speak and then everybody's awake. And he's just the best. He's just been a dear friend. We've known Rob for years and years, not just his years in Congress, but if you remember, he was in the legislature, the Utah legislature. You can come up, Rob. I'm just killing time talking about you. And he was also the Speaker of the House, and those were talk about fun years. I mean, those 2 years that he was Speaker were great years, fun times. I have a lot of great stories about that time. So Rob is out there. He is selling his book, and he is generously giving $10 for every book he sells out there. He's going to give that $10 back to Utah Eagle Forum. So go buy a book, okay? So we're going to hear from Rob. He's going to, well, this is the title of his talk. So It'll be a good one. Yeah, I just pointed out that we use you to entertain the troops, and people start to get tired.
Okay.
So that's your obligation. Thanks. Oh, well, this is Labrita's book. I'm taking it back.
And you're going to tell me when to be quiet? How much? All right. I'll be short of that. Now, thank you so very much for inviting me here and having me back again. It's always a joy to come to Eagle Forum, except for the fact that you have those big monitors back there, so I get to see what I look like, and that is not a positive thing. I was on the phone the other day talking to a group of people. So there was a group of people on the other end of that, and I was talking about the book that I had just written, and I heard on the line somebody said, "Who's the author?" And they were told, "Rob Bishop." And then I heard on the line the person said, "Who's he?" It's actually only been 3 years since I left Congress, but I thought there would be a little bit longer staying period before my relevance actually left totally. So I apologize for that. I will tell you, though, when I was still back in Congress, and I was chairman of the Resource Committee, we had to hire another person, staff, for that committee. So the staff director was the person that was going to do the interview of this person that was from Utah and was working with one of the senators at the time. And he went off to do the interview, and 2 of my personal staff were there who knew the person who being interviewed. And the one said, "Well, you know, he's a hard worker, he'll do a good job for you, but he's awfully arrogant and conceited and obnoxious." And my second staffer said, "Well, yeah, I mean, he'd probably do a great job because he's really a smart person, but he's kind of a punk." And just then, my committee staffer who had done the interview came back in and said, "I just interviewed the kid, Rob. I think you'll like him because he reminds me of you." So that's the story of my life, I'm afraid. I did spend 16 years in the Utah legislature and 18 years in Congress. And I also spent 28 years teaching school. And the thing that I found out is when I went back to Congress, the first thing I realized is that all those things, all the textbooks that I had been using, and especially because the last decade and a half I was doing all AP government and AP US history, and the textbooks I was using were basically wrong. I mean, they weren't bad, but they were just naive and somewhat inept. So I had this compelling feeling that I needed to write down the experiences and the stories I had that I wished I could have had when I was actually teaching school of how Congress actually does operate and what was going on at that time. And I felt that compulsion to do it until about the last year of my term in office, and I realized I've done what I can do. So the book that we're trying to hawk out there is really designed for teachers to try and give supplemental stories and supplemental information that they could use in classes. But I also think it's available for anybody who's actually trying to teach it, or anyone who's actually just interested of how Congress operates and the kinds of things that really are going on during that particular period of time. So the first 4 chapters are about what I think is the philosophy of Congress, that is the philosophy of government, that is extremely important. The next 14 are simply how Congress is organized and how it operates on the floor and in committees and in organizations. And the last 2 are things that I picked up in my first run for Congress, as well as what it was like to live in Washington, D.C. So I would ask you to buy the book for 2 basic reasons. Number 1 is I'm old and I need the money. And number 2, as Gail did say, my royalty is $10 from these books. I am donating that $10 to Eagle Forum as a fundraiser or project to try and help out. So if you buy the book, you're helping my publisher and you're helping Eagle Forum at the same time. So I wish you could do that. Let me also say applaud for Eagle Forum, but I realize, not me, but Eagle Forum. While I do have a couple other things here, I would like to say a few other things that I learned in Congress that I'd like to share with you. And the first one is there are a whole lot of members of Congress, not necessarily from our delegation, I think we have good people, but there are a whole lot of members of Congress that really don't understand what they're talking about when they get back there. There are a lot of members of Congress who talk about federalism and the importance of that balance of power until they find a program, a national program that they can support that will bear his or her name, or some money that could be sent to a project back in their home state, and then all of a sudden the principles are thrown under the bus and they go ahead and expand the growth of Congress again. For example, I was back there when we were reauthorizing No Child Left Behind, a program that should have never been passed in the first place, but it's still there. There was a very conservative member from Tennessee. He's a good person in every other way, but he also loved the idea of physical education. So as we were going to reauthorize No Child Left Behind, he wanted to amend it to mandate there would be a physical education component that would be part of No Child Left Behind. My job as the chairman of the 10th Amendment Task Force was to go down on the floor and plead the 10th Amendment and to tell people that there is nothing wrong with physical education. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It is good to get those kids, force them as best you can to get out there and move around, whatever you want to do. But if you really want a good program, you should get the PE teachers in a district to get together who they're going to have to be the ones to implement it anyway. Get them to come up with the program that would be successful. A perfect idea for any school district. Could even be a perfect idea for the legislature, although the legislature probably shouldn't morally do that. They legally have the responsibility over education. They create the districts. They at least have the authority to do that. Congress doesn't. Congress has neither the moral authority or the legal authority to piddle around with education. So my idea was to stand up there quickly and say, look, it's a great idea, but Congress is not a school board. I mean, they did everything to try and convince us to do it. They even brought Richard Simmons back to lobby us. He was wearing a suit the entire time. Nonetheless, that was not the role and the function of government. So part of the book as well is to try and do what I still do. I get to teach one class at Utah State in the fall. And I still say I want to teach my kids that, to me, the most important founding father of American history is Isaac Newton, somebody who never lived here and died a half century before the First Continental Congress ever got together. But the reason he is, to me, the most important founding father is because those who did found this country wanted to make sure that you could guarantee individual liberty, and you couldn't do it by passing a law to say that. Madison called them parchment barriers that could easily be broken. But they did realize that when Newton, the physicist, was talking about for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, that you could create by structure of government the way of keeping power balanced against power so that no one person, no one group, no one cabal could ever have enough power to actually take away your individual liberties. It's the structure that's important, which is why Newton is the most important person up there. That's who they followed. That's who they should understand. And that's the problem that a lot of members of Congress simply don't have. They don't understand that power balance is the only thing that can guarantee those individual liberties. Let me define a term right here first, before my time runs out here. Individual liberties, to me, are liberties that are given by God and need to be protected from the government, as opposed to a civil liberty, which is a group right that is given by the government. The founders wanted to guarantee those individual liberties, and the only way you can do that is by structure. You want to cut down the amount of money that government spends? Federalism is the only way you can do that. I had a newspaper, which will be nameless, Deseret News, who wanted to know what I thought of how you can actually stop spending so much, and I said federalism. They didn't like that answer. They wanted another program. The problem is not that the government spends too much money, we are spending on too much. If all of a sudden you simply had the division of labors coming back in here so that government would actually do what the national government does best and let the states and local governments do what they do best and not cross-fund them all, is the only way. There is no structural way to actually solve that problem unless you put federalism back into place. I would say one last thing too. The idea of horizontal balance of powers, checks and balances, is as important as vertical between the national and the federal government. The biggest concern you should have are executive orders. We have always had executive orders in this country. In fact, Washington was the first president who did executive orders. He did 8 in his 8 years. From 1850 to 1900, in that period of time, there were 158 executive orders. Some were big, but there were only 158. Teddy Roosevelt, when he became president, did not believe in federalism. He thought that states should be local administrative units and decisions should be made in Washington. He said it's not bad for one person to make decisions, I'm assuming, as long as it was himself. He made 1,000 executive orders in his almost 8 years. When Woodrow Wilson came in, he did not believe in the horizontal balance of powers, checks and balances. He called it constitutional witchcraft. And he did not believe that the riffraff that you elect to your legislative body should be making the laws. Laws should be made by, or decisions made by, the experts who are in the agencies that are all part of the federal government. He did 1,800 executive orders. Franklin Roosevelt was on his way to 4,000 executive orders when he died in office. It has ebbed and weighed since that time period, but the last 4 presidents we've had have all gone crazy with executive orders. George W. Bush, when he signed a law, he had a signing statement which told how he would interpret that particular law. Barack Obama, after the his last 2 years in office, he was fairly moderate, his first 6. His last 2 years, after he'd lost that last midterm election, that's when he looked at Congress and said, from now on, I'm going to govern with a pen and a telephone. And that's when he went out, executive orders out the yin-yang. Donald Trump passed executive orders. A lot were to overturn Obama's, but he had other executive orders, even some of them which I thought were good. For example, he had an executive order dealing with e-cigarettes on advertising of e-cigarettes. I liked it. I thought it was the right thing to do. Except if you're going to have somebody tell a private company what limitations they will have on advertising, it needs to be done by a legislative body who are elected by the people, not a president sitting, passing with one piece of paper in the Oval Office. President Biden did 100 executive orders in his first month in office. President Trump, when he talks about how he'll be a dictator on the first day, well, the only way he can do that is by executive orders. And when Biden says he's upset with that concept, you need to remind him, you did 100 in the first month that you were there. The issue here is executive orders, I don't care if they're good or not. Biden did one on AI, which I think is great. But you don't have a president making laws. That has to be done by Congress. And the other people that have to realize that, it's Congress. Congress has to realize you quit making blanket laws that have, for example, remember in 2008 we had the TARP bill that was passed? I'm summarizing this, but I'm not far off. The TARP bill basically said that financial institutions getting federal funds would be determined by the Secretary of the Treasury. And the Secretary of the Treasury would determine how much money each of them would get. That was the law Congress passed. I'm proud I voted against it, but that was still the law that Congress passed. Congress has to realize executive orders cannot overturn anything Congress has passed if Congress is very specific in what it says it has and needs to do. One of the nice things about Paul Ryan is he recognized this problem when he started to organize an Article I task force to try and claw back power from the executive branch and put it in Congress, so that Congress would actually have the responsibility of approving every rule and regulation before it went into effect. The state of Utah does that. Congress can do it itself. And I feel chagrined that we failed in that because the staff didn't want to spend that much time. It has to be done that way. So what you need to do is make sure not only your presidents quit making executive orders, but your congressional delegation also understands it is their responsibility to write the laws specifically and clearly to take the power back and make those decisions, because it has been moving since the 1900s in the wrong direction. And I'm sorry, all those things are mentioned in the book, which is why I want you to buy it. Primarily because I'm still old and I need the money. I thank you for everything you've done. I thank you for what Eagle Forum does. I thank you for being here and caring about it, even if it is in January and it's cold in January, and you still always do this in January. But thank you. Eagle Forum, thank you. And please buy a lot of books so I can give a lot of money to Eagle Forum. Appreciate you all.
Well, you know, Rob, we have this meeting in January because the legislature meets in January. If you would change your schedule, all you guys over here, then we'd have it in the summer. Can we do it in the warm weather? They start in January. We have to drive up here in the snow. I have to go around the point of the mountain. I'm terrified. By the time I get there, I'm mad at all of them, so that doesn't help. So, yeah, here we are. Okay, so we're going to, if I could find David and Kim and everybody that's supposed to be up here helping right now, we're going to need to move this podium down for our next speakers, because this is going to be delightful. When we were at Eagle Council, James Lindsay was a speaker there. And we had Chris and James do kind of a little bit of a fireside chat. So that's what we're going to do with Delane England and James Lindsay. But I need to make one quick announcement, and then I'll get away from this so he can move it. Today's event has been being live streamed on Twitter, or X, I guess now it is. And it's just X at Eagle Forum, Utah, but just UT Eagle Forum. And we're also on Facebook right now, but they tend to try to shut us down, and X doesn't shut us down. So if you want to watch it again, you can go to either any of these media area and watch it again. If you want your friends to get to see it, or you can just start texting all your friends and say, hey, quick, go to Facebook Live or X Utah Eagle Forum, and you can watch the rest of the day. So, okay, we're going to move this podium, put the table and chair up here, and then we're going to hear from James Lindsay and Delane England. And by the way, you notice I haven't been telling you a lot about the speakers today, because otherwise, with the kind of resumes these people have, that's all you would have heard was their resume. So we put the resume in the program, and we just introduce them and let them come, and you can find out all about them when you hear them speak.
So far. Okay, great. We are live. Awesome. Well, I feel so honored. Usually I feel like I get to do like things I don't want to do, and this is one of them. But to be able to interview Dr. James Lindsay is really, red letter day, an honor. I am so excited. I just love, as I was telling Dr. Lindsay, or James, I feel like, like before I ever met him, I felt like I already knew him because he was talking in my house all the time. I was always listening to him, and I was seeing him, so I felt like we were already friends, and he never knew me or had met me. So it was really fun and really an honor to get to meet you and to get to know you. So you are in for a real treat. If you don't know who he is, you will soon. He is a genius. So I am going to give you a very short bio of Dr. James Lindsay. He is an author of 8 books. He used to be a mathematician professor, and he is now a political commentator. And his books range from most modern theory to critical race theory, everything in between, all over the place. He is an amazing author. He is also the founder of New Discourses, and I love what his organization is dedicated to, shining the light of objective truth in subjective darkness. Does that not say it all? He is the co-author of Cynical Theories, How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why That Harms Everybody. And he's the author of Race Marxism, and his newest book, which I believe is not out yet.
There is one still that's out. The newest one that's out is called The Marxification of Education.
And that's already out.
And there's one coming soon that we might mention later.
Okay, and if you don't know, he is on Fox News, Glenn Beck, Joe Rogan, NPR. He has even spoken at Oxford Union and at the UEN Parliament. He has spoken at National Eagle Forum, and now the pinnacle of his career at Utah Eagle Forum. So, James, you were, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but he could talk an entire hour about this or longer, but he was a math professor, and then he became what he is now. So tell us as shortly and briefly as you can the fun story of how you went from being a math professor to being a political guru.
I don't know if I'm a guru. I don't want to be that. But, okay, so the story does unfold across a decade. So it's not like, oh, this happened and then here I am. I was a math professor at the University of Tennessee, and I was getting frustrated with the fact that the requirements to continue to teach mathematics at the freshman level, what are called service courses, the ones they make you take if math is not your major or engineering is not your major, they were telling us that basically everybody had to pass. It was minimize the number of students that you fail, don't demoralize kids, bump their grades, give them extra credit, do whatever you have to do to keep them in. And I didn't really want to participate in an education system that I thought wasn't dedicated to educating, but was rather dedicated to passing people through and giving them a credential. So I decided to leave academia in 2010, and I have not taught since 2010, and it turns out to be very difficult to do mathematics on the side. It's a hard subject. So I left, and in a rather drastic career change, I became a massage therapist, which left me a little bit academically bored. And I started to get involved in these discussion forums in the philosophy of science and other kinds of academic fields that aren't quite as difficult as math. Sorry if you're a philosopher, it's just not as hard. And it's just not. And so I was involved in these discussion forums, and more or less they get attacked by feminism. And everybody was getting accused of being a sexist and so on, and it didn't make any sense. And so, unlike most of the people that I was peers with at the time, I was starting to write with some of these people. You know, I had an article in Scientific American and a few other places, Time magazine, before I realized it's a World Economic Forum magazine. But at any rate, I was writing and I was working with several people, and did a different trait, which is that I wanted to understand what these feminists were talking about. So I started asking them questions, and not the kinds of questions that you might think, but rather, will you show me the materials where this stuff that you're talking about is defined? So they sent me articles, and I started to read them, and this led to reading academic articles and feminist theory and gender studies, and I thought, holy cow, what is going on over there? And I started kind of tracking the academic literature from maybe 2013 through 15. And a friend of mine that I was writing with, his name's Peter Boghossian, and I decided that these people are definitely ripe for an academic hoax. They need to be fooled into thinking that something absolutely absurd is legitimate scholarship, and we'll see if they publish it. And so we wrote one as a trial balloon in 2017 in May, and it was accepted by a very low-level journal. And this created a lot of controversy, and because there are children in the room, I will refrain from naming the title of the paper, because this is academia, so of course you can guess that it's a little bit perverse. But at any rate, this was controversial. They said if you really wanted to prove your point, you need to do a lot more papers, they need to be in higher level journals, blah, blah, blah. So Peter and I said, let's do that. And we wrote 20 more over the course of 2017 through 18, over about 15 months, together with a woman, Helen Pluckrose, that I wrote Cynical Theories with. And the three of us wrote these papers, and we ended up getting 7 of our papers accepted. 7 more were under peer review still, on the way to being accepted, when the Wall Street Journal figured us out, tattled on us, and the jig was up, and we were no longer allowed to continue hoaxing them. I can't really tell you too much about those papers. Suffice it to say that they were not academically adequate. They could easily lead to my tenure and ascension to the highest ranks of leadership at Harvard. But I didn't plagiarize except for one book. We did actually get a paper accepted in a social work journal, a feminist social work journal, that was a direct plagiarism of chapter 12 of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. And Peter got brought up on charges by his university for this little stunt we pulled, and one of the charges was that he plagiarized, because they were going to take that very seriously. And so they charged him. They said, how do you plead to the charge of having plagiarized Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf? And he said, I plead guilty. And the guy replied immediately, we withdraw the charge. Because it's so humiliating, I guess, to have published Hitler as social work. This put us kind of on the map as people who understood what was going on with woke literature as we were coming to understand it. I was reading a ton of it to be able to do that. And I realized somewhere in the middle, around New Year's 2018, that civilization unravels if this stuff is treated as academic scholarship. And I went, and perhaps the boldest move of my life, and I went to my wife and I said, I want to quit my job and dedicate all my time to studying and exposing this because I have a head start. To which she replied, because we're old school, my wife is a woman, she replied, can you make money doing that? And I said, I don't know. And she very, very generously, and to the maybe good fortune of the nation, said, you have 18 months to figure that out. And then this little stunt's over. But it turns out we got the plane off the ground. By the way, 18 months meant 15 months. I'm not kidding. She really is a woman. And so that led to me having to speak about this issue a ton, studying the issue a ton. And all I've done professionally since is either read about it, write about it, podcast about it, or travel and speak about it. So I read the Marxist literature, I read the woke literature, I connect the dots between them, I can give a comprehensive explanation about how everything that's happening in the world is an updated version of communism, from the World Economic Forum and the United Nations through the CCP, all the way down to the gender bending in the schools. It's all communism, if you need a short answer for what it is. But that's how we got here, is I decided to make fun of some feminists.
And you gotta love his wife that would give him 18 months to find out if he was gonna make money on it. So pretty impressive. So you're in Utah, as you know, because sometimes when you travel a lot, you forget where you are.
That's true.
So in Utah, we think that we are a red state. We think that we're very Republican, and we have most of our, 75% of our Senate and our House are led by Republicans. But you are here to tell us what I already know, and many of you do. We're not that red. So tell us how we're not red, why we're not red.
Yeah, I bring you the bad news that you probably are already aware of, that this is the fakest red state in the country. You even beat Georgia for the fakest red state in the country. And you do have a lot of people in your offices that have ours by their name, which is not quite the same thing as saying that they're philosophically Republican. And that's a big problem. I don't know if you know that the office of the governor in this state 3 or 4 years ago announced explicitly that they intended to become the cradle of the fourth industrial revolution. That's in black and white from the office of the governor in, I think, 2019, so we can figure out whether it was Governor he, him, or somebody else that did that. I'm not super up on Utah politics, I confess. There are 49 other states that are also on fire that I have to attend to sometimes. But the fact of the matter is that the fourth industrial revolution is one of the many names for the gigantic transformation of our entire civilization and way of life that nobody should want to be a part of. And Utah has taken it upon itself to be the national leader in that program, which could only possibly be happening if it were an extremely fake conservative state, which is, by the way, if I were a subversive communist and I wanted to try to pull off a gigantic heist, I wouldn't put it in a blatantly liberal or progressive state. I would put it in a red state where nobody's looking. And Utah seems to have fit the bill for a wide variety of reasons. Some of those are going to be your natural resources. Some of those are physical infrastructure. Some of those are data infrastructure. You're the physical and data crossroads of North America. There are a lot of reasons why. The LDS Church has a gigantic reach globally, so it's a very useful apparatus to spread global agendas if they wanted to try to infiltrate with that. So Utah becomes a very fruitful area to try to target. If you don't know what the fourth industrial revolution is, you should hear this, though. This idea comes from Klaus Schwab, who's the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, and he said, in short, the first industrial revolution was the machine revolution, the second industrial revolution was the electrical revolution, the third industrial revolution was the computer or digital revolution, and what he says those three industrial revolutions have in common is that they changed our working environment. What the fourth industrial revolution is where we move into actually not just the digital, but we actually go into the digital space ourselves. It's the internet revolution, and he says the difference is that this revolution doesn't change our environment, it changes us. So the goal is to, as Karl Marx might have had it, remake man into the new sustainable and inclusive man who has the right values, who's connected through his devices, through the things that he's implanted or carries or wears on his body to the internet at all times. It is to generally create a global hive mind, and this is what the World Economic Forum in conjunction with the United Nations and their subsidiary, the World Health Organization, are all really pointing toward. And for whatever reason, your glorious state with its lovely new flag has decided that it is going to be the vanguard of that project in the United States of America, which means Utah's in big trouble. And believe you me, I've gone around for about a year trying to tell people we need to pay attention to what's happening in Utah. We need Envision Utah, for example. We need to pay attention to what's happening in Utah. I get laughed at. Nobody believes that good conservative Mormon Utah could possibly be doing anything nefarious or globalist, but it turns out that a whole lot of the architecture for the whole program is centered here, started here, was built out here, and so Utah's got some struggles ahead of it. And I know that this is sort of a Mormon thing, so it's kind of fun to say. The fate of the nation sort of depends on what happens with Utah in fulfillment of certain prophecies that were made some time ago about the role that Utah would play in the decisive moment of history that we are now entering into. So I'm hoping to help Utah figure these challenges out. But currently, it's making a lot of moves that are very consistent with, we'll just say, the United Nations in general, which is why I'm glad to hear what Senator Mike Lee is up to, pushing to get us out of that.
I don't know, I can't hear him. So no pressure, but it's on you, babe. Yeah, keep that in mind. So we're just going to segue right into one of the most important topics, in my opinion, that we are dealing with right now. Some people call them PPPs, public-private partnerships. We have been talking about public-private partnerships for 15 years as Eagle Forum, and it has been very difficult, virtually impossible, to really be heard or listened to. Then we get this amazing treasurer, Marlo Oakes, and you are right on top of this, and I want you, public-private partnerships sound really good on the surface. You're going to take the private sector is going to help pay for the government. It's going to be awesome. It's going to save us lots of money. Tell us the truth about public-private partnerships.
I mean, the simple truth of it, and we can save some time here, is that the old name for public-private partnerships was fascism. What a public-private partnership is in that specific regard is that the state operates as kind of a centralized core corporation, and this is actually Benito Mussolini's model. I've been reading Mussolini for the last month or two in detail for really the first time. And so the state becomes the central corporate entity, and then the corporations within the states, the actual corporations, operate through a subsidiary model. So they're like, if you understand shell corporations, or you understand the idea of, Frito-Lay owns like 25 brands, and each one is technically its own corporation, but it's owned in subsidiary fashion to a larger corporation. It works like that, but the biggest corporation on the pile is the state. And in fact, what's happening here is that primary amount of collusion is happening between the state and not necessarily companies like energy companies or whatever else, but what we're seeing is that they're colluding with the financial sector, and they're colluding with the pharma sector, and they're colluding with the tech sector to censor, to contour information. We heard about mismal and disinformation earlier, which means telling the truth. And this is why the Southern Poverty Law Center has a profile on me, by the way. Which is a funny thing it's seeing as it's January 6th, by the way. One of the things they note about me is that I made fun of George Floyd on January 6th last year. That's in my profile. Can you imagine the shame? Can you imagine the shame? I'm definitely going to change my ways. You guys go and pray for justice for George Floyd, which means closing the border, obviously, to keep the fentanyl out, and then the ghost of George Floyd will bring you good Democratic presents like broken windmill blades and things. It's just how it works. But the point is, the public-private partnership, the best way that I've heard it explained is actually the way Vivek Ramaswamy explains it, which is to say that which they cannot accomplish through the front door of the government, they're going to accomplish through the back door of the corporations. Tech companies can censor what happens on their platforms. The government can't censor, but what we've seen through the Twitter files is that the government was leaning on these companies to censor people in specific ways, which does violate the First Amendment, and there are these lawsuits now pending about that. But the idea of the public sector and the private sector getting in bed together and creating one sector, the public-private with a hyphen sector, is really a dangerous concept because, again, anywhere that you normally would be able to go petition the government for redress of your grievances as outlined in the First Amendment, all of a sudden you're going to run into a corporate wall or a proprietary, like with the schools. You go, I want to see what you're teaching my kids. Say, well, unfortunately we're using a lot of proprietary supplementary curriculum, and that's protected by copyright law, so we can't show you what we're teaching your kids. And what they can do is they can use kind of the best of both worlds from the perspective of power to leverage over citizens to take away all of our freedoms and to work together so that I guess the goal really is that you will own nothing and you will be happy. The government will create the circumstances where the businesses that control people thrive the best, and the businesses in turn will lobby to make sure that the government and its representatives, many with R's by their names, do the things that are in the corporation's best interests to become monopolistic oligarchy as opposed to a competitive market environment.
Okay, well, that leads us, we are going to talk about the flag in a minute. But first, before we do that, I want to talk about education. Because we all care about education. It's a huge issue. And we find in education there's a lot of really nice sounding words like diversity, inclusiveness, equity. But we find those words have dual meanings. Talk to us about DEI.
Yeah, so the first thing that you have to understand, you probably have got to at least, you may be much more advanced in this, but you have probably got at least to the point in you're dealing with woke stuff to where when you read it, you feel like you want to gag. Like you see the words and you know that something shady is going on with the words, and I can't read this stuff anymore, I'm sick of it, I don't even know what it means. And you probably get this weird feeling about this kind of copy-paste boilerplate that they always publish. Well, the thing you have to understand is that every woke term, so every specialist buzzword they have, conceals an agenda. The way that that's affected is that they have two meanings. The words have two meanings that are put into play. One that they expect normal people will think the word means, and one that is the activist meaning. And which one do they mean? You want to say, oh, well, they mean the activist. No, that's not correct. They mean both at the same time. They mean both according to whether or not they're being watched at that moment. If they're being scrutinized, all of a sudden it's the plain sense of the word. Inclusion just means that we don't do anything that hurts people's feelings. We make sure that people aren't left out. It sounds very good, but in reality, what inclusion means when nobody's watching is that it means that we're going to include values and lessons that are outside of the pale of the existing society, what Gramsci called the cultural hegemony of the existing society. So we're going to include things that are outside of American values or Utah values or good principles or just the way things are in America. I'm trying to not use the word cultural hegemony again because that's the correct term. And what that really means is communists. What it really means is Marxists and other militant ideologies. Fascism is another militant ideology that's outside of the pale of the Constitution and American values for sure. And so it means including these kinds of values. So it means teaching your children to view whether it's social issues, whether it's environmental issues or whatever, through that particular lens, and creating an environment where that's fostered and nothing else is allowed. Diversity sounds like it's oh yeah, we want to attend, we don't want to leave people out just because they're not part of the majority. You hear a lot about ethnic or religious or sexual minorities. You hear a lot about historically underrepresented groups, so we want to fix the representation. You hear phrases like that. And so we want diversity to bring that in, but that's not what they actually mean. They want diverse to the set of usual values. So when they're being watched, it means, no, we're just trying to make sure that there's great representation and so nobody's left out. That's diversity and it's our strength. But then the second nobody's watching, what it actually means is, as Ibram Kendi phrased it, experts in diversity. In other words, people who have been awakened to a Marxist consciousness of what it means to be considered an other in your society. Equity is not actually as tricky as diversity and inclusion. Equity literally just has a definition they won't tell you, which is an administered system in which shares are adjusted to make citizens equal. In other words, socialism. It's just an update of the word so that you don't know that they're implementing socialism. And that's the value set that diversity and inclusion are actually trying to work toward. Equity is not an American value. So diverse means diverse to American values, and inclusion means including not American values, and specifically it's equity. And why is that not an American value? Well, you could appeal to Martin Luther King, where we're concerned about content of character, quality of merits, in judging somebody, or we could appeal back to what he was actually referring to, which is the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment contains an equal protection clause, which does not mean adjusting shares to force equality of outcome, because that requires discrimination, which intrinsically violates the equal protection clause. We don't have an equitable protection clause. And so equity actually is just a trick. It's just a straight trick. It doesn't have two secret meanings. You hear these other words like we want to have a place where everybody feels like they belong. We want to foster a sense of belonging in our schools or in our workplaces. What that actually means is that we want to have unity in the workplace under a set of contrived standards that favor the people that have been historically left out, or really communists. And so if you don't go along with how do we know it's communists and not, say, racial minorities? Well, look at Larry Elder. He's the black face of white supremacy, says the Los Angeles Times. Look at Dave Chappelle. He made his jokes about trans people allegedly from his, and I quote, position of white privilege. I don't know if you've seen Dave Chappelle ever or heard anything the man has ever said, but to accuse him of white privilege is a bit of a stretch. I think that's actually one of the jokes he used to make in his own show, as a matter of fact. So you can tell that what it actually means is ascribing to the same values. This is when Ayanna Pressley said, we don't want any more black faces who don't want to be black voices, and we don't want any more brown faces who don't want to be brown voices. When they wrote that Pete Buttigieg, who is gay, and also the son of the guy who translated the Marxist Antonio Gramsci into English at Notre Dame in 1970, Joseph Buttigieg, when they said that he doesn't speak with the gay voice, so he doesn't actually represent gay politics correctly, so he's not authentically gay, they're saying that if you don't actually agree with their politics, you're not diverse, you're not inclusive, and you're not actually fostering a sense of belonging. So it's literally, and this is maybe a different tangent, it's literally the formula that Mao Zedong used to transform the CCP and then China in the 1940s and 1950s. The formula is called unity, criticism, unity. We create a desire for unity. We all want a place where everybody feels like they belong. And then we criticize those elements that are preventing the unity from arising. You see, we would have had national unity if you would have just got your vaccine. But instead, we didn't get that because you dirty, unvaccinated people prevented us from having national unity so we could move forward. And you criticize those people and humiliate them through struggle. And then we can have, as Mao put it, a new unity on a new basis. We can all adopt sustainable and inclusive values, and it'll be kumbaya after that. And so that's actually the model of these words. But every single one of their terms, if you're reading anything they publish and you say that word looks like it's a buzzword, it has two meanings. I guarantee you it has two meanings. And it is absolutely necessary for the maximum number of people to be able to learn to stop and ask questions. Do not assume that that word like diversity that you think you must know, that you know what it means. You have to start digging deeper and say, what's that going to look like in practice? How's it going to be implemented? What does it mean to be an expert in diversity? What is this was big in Oklahoma. A lot of their paperwork said to appeal to diverse individuals. What is a diverse individual? What in the world does that mean? And so it's easy to read past that and say, well, I'm college educated. I won't ask that question. You've got to ask that question. Because they're using language in this double-headed way so that they can play the game of heads I win, tails you lose, whether they're being scrutinized or not. And they will advance the activist agenda on the back of those words, which we find in policy tucked in all over the place. Oh, it's a small concession. Just place it. We want to make sure that education is something that makes an inclusive environment for all students. Sounds good. Nope. That's one of those phrases that should make you a little queasy now. Inclusive for all students? Why are you having to specify that? Oh, because your underlying assumption is that some students actually don't have equality, and so we're going to jimmy the system to create an equitable outcome. In other words, adjust shares to make citizens equal. We're going to apply socialism to this system. And until you start to learn to see through this language, they're going to trick you every time. And then I know you guys are probably a pretty religious crowd, and the devil is characterized as a deceiver and an accuser. And you need to think about, how does this work? Well, you think that I have a bad intent, you're a racist. Well, there's your accuser. And so I really do think that you need to be careful to look that these words, these phrases, carry hidden assumptions of hidden power dynamics that the second you put them in and then stop looking, they will apply it in that way in order to change your institution from within. That's what Gramsci said was creating the counter-hegemony within the institution to make the Western society soft to socialist values and Marxism.
Very well said. Okay, so in Utah, we passed a bill a couple of years ago, or last year, it's kind of blurred, but anyway, Representative Ken Ivory was the sponsor of the bill to get pornography out of schools. It just does not even seem like we need to pass a law to get pornography out of our public schools, but we did need to, and we did get the law passed. And in response, Davis County School District, which I'm admitting that I'm actually Davis County, instead of taking the porno out, they took out the Bible. So we still don't have the pornography out of schools. If I took those same books, those same pages, and went and read them to my neighbor kid, I would be arrested, but they are in our schools. And I just want to give a quick plug to Utah Parents United, ratedbooks.org. You can go there and you can find the schools and the books, the libraries where these books are, so you can be proactive and know how to protect your families and other people's families, ratedbooks.org. So how do we get the porn out of the schools? How do we actually become more effective?
Okay, so let's just talk about the Bible thing first real quick.
Let's do.
And I don't actually want to talk about the issue of whether or not the Bible's in the schools. What I want to say is that their answer to trying to pull pornographic young adult literature out of schools was to say, well, if that's what you want, then we're going to also pull out the Bible. It means they're confessing that those books are part of a religious movement on their side. That's what they're telling you. And in fact, queer theory, which is what this is based in, is a cult religion. And that's not hard actually to prove in a variety of different ways. Queer theory is not an academic theory. It is, in fact, the doctrine of a cult religion, and they act like it's a religion, and they bring kids into the cult. They cut off from their families. They try to, if you want to know which cult it is, it's the very old Gnostic cult, so they hate their physical body, so they try to transform their physical body to be in line with their true spiritual nature, which they've been enlightened to by a guru or a teacher or something of that kind that's revealed to them their true nature of who they are. This is a religious movement. It requires you not just to reject the Bible and its claims, or to reject biology and its claims about sex and the realities of life and human physiology and everything else. It also requires you to adopt a particular view that there's a true human in his or herself that's inside that precedes the physical body that it happens to inhabit, which is therefore a soul, and that soul can be out of alignment with the body that it happened to land in, and that social strictures have then constrained it to act in certain ways. That's a lot of detail to just point out that I literally can write a book, and actually have written a book with another guy coming out soon, detailing that, in fact, queer theory is a religion. And when they decided to retaliate by saying, well, fine, we'll take the Bible out, they're confessing that this is a religion, and it is actually an Establishment Clause question as to whether or not it belongs in the schools in the first place. And the answer is no, it does not. The promotion of a cult religion is not something that our state schools should be doing in any state, period. And that's pretty important. Now, how can you be more effective? Now, this is a little bit challenging for your Mormon sensibilities, for certain. The most effective thing in the world that you can do to fight back against the books in the schools is to get the books in the schools. Not into the schools. Go get them yourself. Get copies of the books. If you are a lady, you have a certain advantage, I've noticed, because I tend not to carry a bag, but ladies tend to carry a bag. And I was introduced to this by an activist in Kansas, a mother there, who got several of the books that were in the school library. She carries them with her in her bag, and when she goes to lunch or she goes to dinner or she meets with anybody, she pulls them out and says, have you seen this? And shows people a physical copy. Another thing that's been very effective, and you've probably seen a number of these things happening, and somebody's going to have to, it's not in line with your values to do this. Queer theory is designed specifically to be against your values, even to read it. You need to get copies of the book. You need to show up to public fora where there are cameras and the whole thing, or on TV or on the news, and you need to read the objectionable material and get shut down for it, because it is in fact objectionable. The FCC will not allow you to push it or to read it. The school board, if you show up at a school board meeting and read one of these books aloud, will cut your microphone on the justification that children might be present. And what you need to do is catch them admitting this again and again and again to move the needle on the issue. So that requires, like Pastor John Amanchukwu, to go around and read the books in public meetings, to read the sexual material out loud, to show pictures of it. If you put them on social media, they will close down your accounts, by the way. The only podcast I've had that was demonetized on YouTube was the one where I read out of one of these books. Queer theory is actually designed to be hard to expose because it's outside, completely outside of the polite sensibilities of normal, healthy adults to share it, and it's not appropriate for children in any way. It turns out the only way to be effective is to show, don't tell. You can't tell people about the books. You have to show them the books, and you have to let them cut your microphone. You have to let them try to sue you for violating FCC regulations. And then in the legislature, you push if it's bad with the FCC, it can't be in schools law. It's actually pretty simple. If the FCC wouldn't allow it on the air, it can't be in our schools. You break up with the American Library Association like your kind of neighbor Montana did. Montana recently broke up with the American Library Association completely. Why? Because the American Library Association is a completely captured institution. Its current president, Emily Drabinski, is openly a declared queer Marxist who has openly throughout all of her professional writing, all the way back to her PhD thesis, talked about the agenda being to, and I quote, queer the catalog. In other words, to turn libraries into a vehicle for advancing opportunities to get children to say, what does that mean? What's happening here? Can men be women? Am I different? Am I somehow not like my parents say? And then to go find a trusted adult, meaning somebody at the school who they can talk about that with, and then hide that from the parents and put them into the affirmation pipeline, which is nothing short of catastrophic child abuse. The most egregious child abuse scandal probably in human history, as a matter of fact, at least in the Western world, and it's happening right under our noses. To be effective, you have to show, don't tell. You have to show what's in those books. You have to do it publicly, and you have to take whatever comes. They'll shut you down, they'll say it's obscene, and that's what you want. You want them admitting that it's obscene, and then you pass a FCC rule through the legislature saying if the FCC says it's not okay to be on the air, it definitely cannot be in schools. Crucially important issue. And let me just reiterate, by the way, the point of the books is to get the kids to wonder and start to ask the questions. In the academic literature of critical pedagogy, which is the fancy name for the brainwashing scam that they use in schools, the point is to create what they call generative themes, to present children with reasons to ask the question, to give spontaneous utterance that then the teacher can give an explanation to. Maybe the teacher isn't permitted to raise the issue of sexuality in the classroom by statute, but they can answer a spontaneous utterance. So if they can put something in front of the child that causes the child to say, I was reading a book in the library and it showed this, what's that mean? Now the teacher gets to talk about it. And so the activist has a workaround to the legislation through that pathway. And so the goal of these materials being present is to generate the opportunity for the child to ask the question, for the adult, who in frankest terms is acting as a groomer into this cult ideology, which is based on sex and sexuality, for that teacher then to be able to circumvent the law and have the conversation and lead them down that pathway of eventually affirmation, which will take place mostly through after-school clubs and meetings and things like that to kind of get around the fact that it can be banned out of the curriculum much more directly. So you have to understand the point of these materials is to get the kids to be curious enough about it, to ask about it, at which point they have free license to do to start the entire process. And that is the purpose of critical pedagogy, which ultimately we have to figure out a way. You can't just blanket ban something that vague, but we have to find a way to remove critical pedagogy from our school system entirely and to treat it as completely illegitimate and brainwashing and wholly inappropriate for children and inadequate to their education.
Thank you. So cancel culture is a really prevalent theme in all of your books and what you do. So how have you seen that evolve?
I think everybody was very well aware a couple of years ago about cancel culture. You were a lot more silent than you are now. I think people probably have actually started to perceive that there were things that 2 years ago you might have hesitated to say that you don't hesitate to say now, which means cancel culture has evolved to have lost a lot of its power. Cancel culture, by the way, we have to be very careful about what it means. It means that when you have done some moral transgression, not necessarily that you violated a company policy or a law, that they are then going to go leverage, say, your employer, your social environment, your church, your community, the people in your life, to try to shun you or fire you or remove you from your livelihood based on social pressure. It is not, as a matter of fact, taking accountability for, say, what you see at Harvard, rampant, flagrant serial plagiarism, and saying, well, we're going to hold you to account for that. It turns out accountability and canceling are not the same thing. Canceling is when they leverage social pressure to get you fired or shunned by your family. It's what the Marxists in China called a struggle session. Outside of having violated anything other than the moral sensibilities of the activists who are pushing the opportunity. But it's really lost its way. In fact, people are frankly sick of it. I've seen a lot of times where these kind of struggle sessions begin or the attempt of the cancellation begins and people just frankly say, no, we're not going to put up with this anymore. People are really tired of it. Living in fear for your job because of something trivial that you said in your private life or whatever that happens to come out. This is something that Americans, I think very broadly, but especially in even fake red states, but states that are coded as red, are just generally tired of. And so I've seen a lot of progress on that. I'm actually more concerned with a purity spiral on the right now than I am with the cancel culture on the left being particularly effective. I think they've primarily overplayed their hand by firing lots and lots of people over the vaccine, especially from the government. The thing in the military where they squeezed it out, that really freaked out Americans, and there's been a kind of a rethinking on a lot of this. The accusations of racism that always had a shelf life, and that shelf life is more or less past. We've actually got a good paradigm case. It's not racism, but it's actually allegedly transphobia with the representative from, was it one of the airlines, who recently went viral for standing up and not using the declared pronouns of a trans activist who's now throwing a gigantic fit. And this guy's a hero. He's not a hero universally. My Democrat dad probably doesn't agree that he's a hero, but generally speaking, his life is not in tremendous peril like it would have been 2.5 years ago over this transgression. And so we have evolved away from a strong cancel culture environment. The struggle session has lost a lot of its potency. And I think what we have to do is continue to do that. We have to continue to push. If, say, somebody here stands up for something that's good and right, and I'm not talking about does something flagrant or obviously a problem, and gets accused of doing a racism or whatever, they say, well, I don't want critical racism in the schools. Well, that must be because you're a racist. I think Claudine Gay should be removed from Harvard. Well, that's because racism against black women in academia. And you say no, and then this whole thing starts. It's got to become a norm for us to say, no, I know that guy, he's a good person. That's not true. And to start standing up with one another, because that's what shields you from cancel culture. Cancel culture works by isolating a target, making them be completely alone and defenseless, and having their professional and social life turn on them. So the opposite of that is that when you see somebody who's falsely accused, you rally to them. No, I know that guy. He's a great guy. I don't think that what he did was wrong at all. And we've got to start having this attitude of standing up for one another, using organizations like this. You should always have a principle in these organizations that we're going to stand with you immediately when you get attacked, and we can sort out the details later, because maybe it's an honest mistake, maybe nothing happened, maybe it was ginned up, but we're going to stand with you first rather than joining in on the pile-on and everything else. And if we do that, we're going to defeat cancel culture completely.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, the time goes fast.
I talk long.
Yeah, I wanted to, that was just tying us right into the cancel culture. We have this historic flag, and as you know, we exchanged it for a new flag. And this is sweeping the nation. Tell us what you think. Do you think that replacing our flag is cancel culture, or is it just a way to market our state?
No, it's communism. It's communism. You need to learn to recognize communism. It's out with the old, in with the new. We're going to have what is a flag? A flag is the banner under which you recognize yourself as a entity, a political entity, a state, whatever it happens to be. And we're going to change those to something completely new and contrived now. We're going to throw out the history, and we're going to have a new banner, which means there's going to be a new unity under a new basis held up with a new flag. It's the exact same process that you saw in China, where the goal was to destroy the four olds, which is to destroy all vestiges of old culture and replace it with new revolutionary culture. And this isn't just Utah. You guys were the first, and you guys have actually gone the furthest with it, but it's happening in Pennsylvania. It's happening rather hilariously in Minnesota, where they literally just copied, they Claudine Gay control paste the Somali flag, and they're going to go, they moved the star, let's be fair, they moved the star, but otherwise it's just a Somali flag. But that tells you a lot about what's going on. Your flag is fairly neutral or whatever in terms of its content, but it's not neutral, politically speaking, in Minnesota. So you can actually get a look behind the curtain as to what the agenda is. The agenda is to destroy old culture and have a fresh, clean start with a new culture, with new values that people are going to rally around without being able to look far back into the past. And this is a standard tactic of communism that's happened in every single place that communism's ever been. They did this in China, actually, to get the red flag with the with the 5 stars. The flag before that under the nationalists had 5 stripes that represented the different peoples of China, and they played an entire critical race theory card in order to change the flag and change the entire culture. They claimed that all of the racial classes of peoples of China, the 55 minority races, were being turned into Han people, and they did the same thing, Han supremacy, good Hans versus, bad Hans. And the whole thing was that they're destroying your culture, and they fomented a minority revolt. And one of the things that they changed was the flag. And so you really got to think twice. The change of flag is to change, in a sense, the symbolism of the thing that you are, and to have a completely new set of symbols and a completely new thing. The flag itself, honestly, in a sense, if absent this context, it's a small thing, and it doesn't really matter if you like the new flag, if you like the old flag, it doesn't actually really matter. But it's not absent the bigger context of destroying history for a marching communist revolution across our country. So you have to say no to the small things, or you're going to also lose the big things.
Okay, well said. One more question. What is the source of the greatest hope that you see for America's future?
It's the American people. It's the American people. I get asked this question everywhere. I have now got to speak in 44 states. And state after state, red state, purple state, blue state, fake red state, doesn't matter. What I see are people awakening, the tone, the tenor changing. I hear people saying that they know. I heard it today more than once. This is the fight of our lives. This is the fight of our lives. I heard this, in fact, from the Speaker of the House. So that means somebody that's in a high office in this state. This is the fight of our lives. So people are starting to realize not just that there's a huge problem, which P.S. I was considered positively crazy 2.5 years ago giving these kinds of talks. I was having the people who invited me were getting hounded by the donors for bringing the crazy guy, for saying that the country was in deep peril. I was saying we could possibly lose our country over things like critical race theory making its way in, and I was insane. And now everybody understands that we are teetering on the brink, and we might actually be hanging by one arm off the cliff already. And that's a huge change. And I see people taking action. I heard great things in this room today. When I was in Tacoma, Washington, I heard the Republican Party for Pierce County there speak, and I heard brilliant strategies for starting to consolidate and regain political power. I went to Canada, which isn't exactly the most, non-communist place. I went there at the beginning of October, and they have an entire movement called Take Back Alberta that's sweeping tens of thousands of members, and they've taken over the entire Albertan government. It's incredible how effective they've been. This is a simple, replicable model, but what it is it's not the government, it's not any of those. It is the people saying enough is enough, and we are the sovereigns in this country. They aren't the sovereigns, we are the sovereigns. That's exactly what our Declaration of Independence and Constitution are about, and people are starting to wake up to it, get interested in it, and starting to speak up about it, and digging deeply into the causes of the problems that we have and exposing them. You know that they don't like to be exposed, because the second they're exposed, they change the name so they can try to do it again. It's not diversity, equity, inclusion anymore, it's inclusive excellence. Yeah, that's going to trick everybody, guys. But that's also something we've caught on to. The name changes used to trick us, and now they don't trick us. So the American people are by far the greatest source of hope. I think that we are going to see, some unbelievably bad things visited on us, I suspect, this year by the powers that be. And unlike when COVID broke out, we're going to immediately blame the powers that be. We're not going to say, oh no, a water crisis just happened. We're going to say they rigged it up, and they're trying to control us, and no, I'm not putting a smart meter on my house, you jerks. We have changed, and we will win, and I'm completely hopeful.
You're awesome. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. James Lindsay.
Thank you, Dawn. Good job. You know where we go with the mics?
Sure, but they'll come get it. Yes, I'm grabbing the water. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. And do you want...
I've been sending texts to get David in here to put that back.
Okay, well, we've got... Thank you. Thank you so much.
Excuse me, guys. Sneak by ya. Did you get lunch?
Yeah, I sure did.
Are you sure?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good.
Okay, are we ready? Can I use this? Huh? It's on? Okay. Okay, we need to get started, but there's a couple of announcements that I want to make. So one thing I want to say, I really appreciate. Okay, we need to, if we can just get started. Oh, thank you. I am just so grateful that we have so many legislators here today, because the things we just heard that are going on in Utah, as well as states across the nation, are the things that so many people don't see or don't recognize. And so, and it's going to be the legislators that are going to fix this. And so I'm grateful that we have these legislators here today. We have the quality of legislators that will fix this. Some of these things that we heard talked about today are already being fixed by legislators in this room. I'm going to talk about some of those things. But thank you, all of you. And would all of you please stand up? So that means Rex and Judy. Hold it for a minute. Judy. All the legislators here today, please stand up. All of you together. And there have been more that aren't here, or still aren't here. But these are the people that we're going to look to fix some of the problems that you just heard James and Delane talking about. Because there are things that are going on that I'm sure some of you are sitting here thinking, when did that happen? I didn't know about that. Well, you can fix it. So thank you for being here today. And we're going to talk more about all of you being here in the future. Now, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor right now. You all have a packet. Would you get your packet, pick up your packet and put it in front of you right now? And in that packet is this little donation envelope. And we've tried to make it as easy as possible, but we really need to have donations for the legislative session. We do this big event, and we don't make money. Trust me, we don't make money. We lose a lot of money, but it's more important to educate. We do this to educate, so we keep the price down, and it's not a fundraiser. But at the same time, we are going into the legislative session. That's a very expensive time of the year for us. We have these interns, these wonderful interns that Mary Ann mentioned, and they are there every day. Articles have been written about them. One time the Tribune did an article on the Eagle Forum, on our eaglets. And these interns are all over the Capitol. They meet legislators. They have assignments that they do. They go into committees and take notes, and they follow bills. And they do so much work for us, which is doing work for you. Because Eagle Forum is an all-volunteer organization. I never get a dime. It costs me to do it. It doesn't give me money to do it. So we need to raise money for the legislative session. We have our printer up there. We just set up an office. We have to feed our interns every day. Can't ask these kids to come and be there all day and not feed them, because we have We have usually about 30 to 40 interns, and they're not all there every day. We have different ones each day of the week. But there's expenses. When we need to, we've even helped them with gas and other things when we need to do that. So if you would take out this envelope, and if you feel like you could put $5, $10 in here, if you want to put even a little bit more, there's QR codes here, so you don't have to write a check, or if you don't have any cash on you, if you use these codes, then you can donate through that. But we will spend your money very wisely, and we'll spend it for you. We'll spend it to do the things you've heard about today and bug all these guys that we are friends with over here and over here. Sure. Are you kidding? We're going to talk about more of that today. So, Ken, did you hear that? How she wants to pay? Yeah. Marlo's going to talk about it. Ken has a bill. We're going to yeah, that would be wonderful. We'll tell the media about it too. So anyway, just pull out this envelope if you will, and if you feel like you could donate, we'll spend your money wisely. Yeah, and George handed me this. This is Wednesday. We have Barbara Petty here. This is Liberty Forum, and of course, we've got Tim Jimenez who's here, and he will be speaking on Wednesday, 10 o'clock at the Provo Library, 10 o'clock in the morning. And so be sure and be there. And also Christina. Christina's here somewhere too. She's also going to be speaking that day, so that's great. Also, our good friend Tim Irwin has donated that beautiful picture that you've probably seen out there in the hall. It was up here before. Let's see, what is the name of that picture, Tim? Oh, One Nation Under God. And it has that beautiful picture of Christ with the founders and the legislators and all the other people around Christ. That's a beautiful picture. Tim donated it. It's a numbered picture. It's in like number 13. And so that is just a silent auction out there. So any of you that would like to bid on that picture, we're starting the bids at $150. Go out and look at it when we have our break. You're going to want that picture. It is absolutely so beautiful. So thank you for all of those things. Now, we can get back to the program. And our next speaker is Paul Allen. I've known Paul for many, many years. Paul, I knew you when you looked like you were, you looked like you should have been in high school. He's done amazing things, and maybe all of you don't recognize the name, but you would certainly recognize, if you look at his bio, you'll recognize all the amazing things that he has done, things that are common words here in the state of Utah. But now he's going to talk to us about something else. It's called AI. And I know everybody's interested in that. They want to know about it. This is the man to tell you about it, because this guy is really smart. So... Andrew, do you know, are we able to play his video? Whit, who knows that? You want it right now? Okay. All right.
While we're waiting, I was unable to come this morning. My wife's uncle passed away, and I was just coming from his funeral, just got here. And he was a 40-year teacher in public schools in Utah. He taught drama for 14 years. He taught English for 26 years. He affected thousands of lives for good. And he was voted the Utah Teacher of the Year in 2010. And sitting there and watching the celebration of his wonderful life reminded me of my high school history teacher, Dee Allred. 1982, 1983, I took AP U.S. History, and the year before, pre-AP U.S. History, taught by Dee Allred, who was the Teacher of the Year in Utah. And he taught me to love the Constitution of the United States. He taught me to love American history. He taught me to read and understand primary source documents. And Dee Allred is one of the great influences in my life. And he'll come up a little bit later as we go on. But we'll start with a 4-minute clip. My brother Mark, who's here today, was able to help me get an audience with the famous Glenn Beck. And here's a 4-minute highlight recap of the interview that Glenn Beck and I had in November.
Paul Allen. He is a tech entrepreneur. He started Ancestry.com. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he has come up with, I think, the idea that changes the power dynamic in your favor. It is called the Citizen Portal. Go there now, citizenportal.ai. I'm going to introduce you to Paul, and he'll take us on a tour of it. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hi, Glenn. I'm doing fantastic today. The way you introduced Citizen Portal as being something the founders would have loved put a huge smile on my face. I can't thank you enough for seeing the potential for good that it really is aiming at.
I think this is one of the most important tools that I've possibly ever seen. So can you take me through this just for the listener? And if you have a computer, I'm telling you, this is a game-changing technology. Go to citizenportal.ai. Let's say I want to find out cities, any city, if they're talking about Agenda 2030. Do I just write Agenda 2030 in the search bar?
Yeah, you can write Agenda 2030 in the search bar. Don't search by a particular speaker and don't limit it to a specific location. And it will show you a heat map of the entire United States. It will show you every state, city, county meeting that has included that phrase. And if you scroll down a little bit below the heat map, it will tell you all of the House and Senate committees over the past, there's about 53, I believe, that may have been discussing Agenda 23. So at a glance, you can see exactly what's being said across the country. And then to your point, when you click on View Results, it shows you a transcript, and as you click on the video thumbnail, it jumps you right into that meeting. Let's say 2 hours and 30 minutes into a 3-hour congressional hearing, someone brought up Agenda 2030. It will take you right to that minute of the hearing, and you can see exactly what was said.
And we've seen the applicability of digital technologies to solving some of the biggest challenges that we face, including achieving the SDGs and doing that under the 2030 Agenda.
Well, imagine this, Glenn. The funding needed for Citizen Portal to reach all the jurisdictions, to get smarter and better, and to help every citizen to become truly informed and engaged on issues they care about is going to be crowdfunded. StartEngine.com, which is arguably the leading crowdfunding platform in the United States, any of your listeners can actually become an investor in the company and crowdfund it so that we can cover all jurisdictions and implement AI for the good of citizenship and for the good of the future good governance we're all hoping for. People are kind of jaded right now. I think a lot of citizens are apathetic and distrusting of government, and they kind of think it's too late, that there's no turning back the clock. We can't restore representative democracy. I think a lot of people feel that angst and worry. No, it's time for people to step forward, to become informed, and to stop having excuses, to participate in self-government. And I don't think there are as many as we need to show up at school boards and city council meetings and to get good government.
This is Citizen Portal AI. It is brand new. I believe it is a democracy and republic saver. This technology will change the dynamics entirely. If you don't get it yet, you will if you go to Citizen Portal AI. You will be able to watch exactly what you're looking for as it is happening in almost real time.
All right, thank you for... I now remember that was a podcast interview, and then that led a few weeks later to an in-studio interview in Dallas, and the 33-minute video of Glenn and me talking about Citizen Portal and AI in general has been viewed, I think, 420,000 times. And over $1 million has been raised for Citizen Portal from over 1,400 individual investors. And so we're very excited that people are becoming really aware of the positive potential uses of AI to awaken in citizens what we need to know in order to show up and have our voices matter. I'll share with you a few anecdotes from my life and then try to juxtapose those with the mission of Citizen Portal. The title of the talk is Empowering Citizens with AI, a Path to Transparent, Accountable Government. And I want to talk about some of the structural changes that have happened in the United States in the past few decades that have led, I think, to a very, very clear government by the few, of the few, and for the few, and not a widespread government of the people, by the people, for the people. And one of the structural changes that has happened was in the 1850s and 60s. My great-grandfather was born in Illinois in 1842. If you were born in Illinois in 1842, you couldn't go down to the city center or the state house and create a corporation. For decades, for centuries, creating a corporation in the world was an act of a monarch or the act of parliament. If you think back to the East Indies Trading Company and you think back to the Hudson Bay Company, those were acts of the crown to create a corporation and to give it a monopoly. To basically, Hudson Bay Company, I think, once owned 10% of all the land mass on the planet, and they had trapping rights and timber rights. And corporations were an act of the government, the crown, the parliament. But it was in the 1850s and 60s in the US and in the UK that limited liability corporation law was first created. And when my grandfather was 20 or 30, he could have gone to the state house and formed a corporation that could last forever and accrue unlimited assets. And just like the corporations in the centuries before that, Peter Thiel, one of the great venture capitalists in the United States, says that all corporations seek to have a monopoly. Now, I don't think all corporations seek to have a monopoly. There are millions of corporations where it's a lifestyle business, a mom and pop, a restaurant. You're not trying to have a monopoly, but a lot of corporations do want to have monopoly power so that they can control the supply, the pricing, and maximize profits. I don't think the founders anticipated that there would be trillion-dollar corporations that basically are monopolies for smartphones or social media or search engines or controlling the information flow, and that those same corporations, when they were founded by innovative young entrepreneur founders who didn't really like government meddling in things, they were just freely working in their garage, they built a company. Well, those same corporations, when they become worth billions and now trillions, they're the biggest they pay for so much lobbying, and so they have access to, and they donate more money to campaigns than anyone else. And so I don't think our founders realized that corporations could have that much power and influence, not only with everything we read and learn and see, but also funding the very structure of government that is supposed to be with checks and balances and listen to the voice of the people and reserve all the rights to the states and the people that aren't enumerated in the Constitution. We've seen kind of like a complete forgetting of that. The next structural change is as a consequence of the rise of the internet. Some of the trillion-dollar tech companies have an advertising business model. They try to capture trillions of hours of our time. They capture our data. Then they auction off our attention to the highest bidder. Okay, I don't think that the highest bidder in those auctions has your well-being in mind. They're trying to maximize profits. And so these corporations that have control of technology and advertising are tremendously influential. Now, what's happened since I was a young paper boy in the 1970s, I had a paper route for the Daily Herald. How many of you go home every night after work and read the newspaper? Raise your hand if you read the newspaper every night. Okay, hardly a hand in the room. Well, if you ask GPT-4 to tell you about the history of the Fourth Estate, the fourth branch of government, the fourth pillar of government, the branch of government that's an unofficial branch that provides checks and balances on the executive and legislative branches. That phrase, Fourth Estate, started being used in Europe in the late 18th century, and then the Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle popularized the concept of the Fourth Estate. The Fourth Estate is the freedom of the press, but what if there's no press coverage of government anymore? What if the newspaper industry for the past 30 years has been so defunded because all the advertisers are going to Google and Facebook and now TikTok, and the newspapers can't afford to send a journalist to cover the local city council meetings? Okay, what happens when you have the rise of corporations and lobbyists and unlimited donations to campaigns? And if you think about, you've heard the phrase, to the victor goes the spoils. Do you know who said that? The former governor of New York, three-term governor of New York in the 1830s. And he was all in favor of the patronage system. And it was a crisis. It was a catastrophe in the 19th century. But a lot of political leaders felt that to the victor goes the spoils, which means all the donors to your campaign, if you're a Republican, you get elected. If you're a Democrat and you get elected, you basically start funneling all the contracts to your patrons, to the people who got you in office. Remember Boss Tweed from Tammany Hall in New York City? I mean, he had a corrupt political machine going for decades. And it was a cartoonist, Graham Nash, who basically outed him. It was a comic. Okay, so the big structural changes that I don't think that our founders saw coming, even though the brilliant balance of power, the checks and balances, the division of powers, the separation of powers, the enumeration of powers, the limited enumerated powers, all of those things were designed because the founders didn't trust human nature. And they knew that power that's too concentrated leads to corruption. And so we end up with a $34 trillion debt and a $1 trillion payment due on the debt this year, on the national debt. Like, none of us want that. I don't think a single American citizen would sign up for that. But it's happened. So what do we do? Well, I believe that there's a new technology that is emerging that can replace the need for the fourth estate. Okay, imagine, a few years ago this was impossible, but imagine every single government meeting in the United States being recorded, and all the documents related to those meetings being indexed by a search engine. So think about Ancestry.com as a genealogy search engine. In the 70s and 80s, it took a lot of time and money to be a genealogist. It was very time-consuming and very difficult. And I believe 25 years later, after Ancestry has been around with now 40 billion records on the internet, millions of people contributing their family trees, finding connections and sharing them with the community, I literally think it's 1,000 times easier to do genealogy than it was 3 decades ago. Now, imagine a data platform, a search engine that has fingertip access for every citizen of the United States to everything that's been going on in their school board meetings, every policy, every ruling, every meeting, every recording of every meeting, every debate, all the city council meetings, all the county meetings, all the state legislature meetings and hearings, and all the federal meetings, not just the congressional, Senate, and House hearings, but all the bureaucratic agencies that have public meetings. Imagine those all being recorded. Imagine there's 1 million hours a year. The AI can now transcribe that in minutes after every video is uploaded. Citizen Portal now has 600,000 hours of publicly recorded meetings, and this year we'll probably do another 1 million hours of meetings. Now, if you don't trust AI, you're probably normal, because, you know, who invented it? Why did they invent it? Do they even understand it? Will artificial general intelligence someday ever emerge? I don't really think it will, but do you trust a search engine? Do you trust a search engine that has known data sets? Okay, I think we all do. One of my starts in kind of the political arena was in 1988. I heard a talk by President Jeffrey Holland of BYU, and he basically put out a call to index and digitize, at least that's how I took it, all the best books ever written in every field of human knowledge. He talked about scholarship and learning and education and libraries and universities as places of learning. And so my brother Kurt had started a search engine company called Folio, and 2 years after President Holland's speech, we decided to put all the world's best books on CD-ROM using the Folio search engine. Well, about a year into that journey, I met Don and Gail, maybe 2 years in, because we decided to take all the founders' writings and all the original primary source documents that track this country's history for hundreds of years, and eyewitness accounts of what happened at all the battles in the Civil War, the primary source documents. And then I went to a conference in Texas. We had this CD Source Book of American History, a known data set of curated thousands of primary source documents, very powerful for anyone wanting to become educated on the Constitution and the founders and our history. Well, at that conference, I found out that IBM had just invested $2.3 million in creating an American history CD-ROM. And my little company was petrified. We're like, how does our little company, Infobases, compete with IBM and their $2.3 million? Well, I found out they had about 100 hours of video footage of Berkeley PhDs describing everything that had happened in American history. They didn't have a single source document. They didn't have the Constitution or the Declaration or the Articles of Confederation. They didn't have any of Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention. They had nothing. And my fear evaporated. Now, I believe that as citizens, if we aren't reading the primary source documents, if we aren't going to those historical sources and becoming intimately familiar with them, we won't have the wisdom we need to challenge, to tackle the challenges that are showing up today and causing all kinds of problems. So, number one, I love primary source documents. Citizen Portal soon hopes to add to its real-time transcription of all public meetings and real-time indexing of all government documents, and empowering you to know exactly what your city, county, state, and federal officials are doing and what's on the agenda. And you can set up keyword alerts to let you know when some meeting's going to happen where they're going to discuss an issue that you care about. We're being taken off guard. We don't know when things are being discussed. Things are happening behind closed doors. The Natural Assets Company issue from the SEC is happening over Christmas time, and thankfully Marlo Oaks, the great treasurer of the state of Utah, and 24 other state treasurers have been able to delay that. But that could consume trillions of dollars of property and resources and tie them up so that we, the people, cannot use them. So we can't be caught off guard anymore. Well, what better way than to hire and harness AI to help you have the power of 1,000 research assistants who are helping you navigate the deluge of information every day and find from the sources you care about what is being said and what's being done. I think if it's 1,000 times easier for citizens to become informed and engaged, I think we'll take back this country in the next 10 years. I was in Little Rock, Arkansas a few months ago and got a standing ovation from a group of citizens, but I started that little conversation. It was at a venture capital incubator, and there were about 200 people there, and I asked everyone, raise your hand if you think you're a good American citizen. Everybody raised their hand. And I thought, good. They probably vote, and they're law-abiding citizens. And then I asked a follow-up question. Keep your hand up if you know the names of your state legislators. And about 90% of them sheepishly lowered their hands and looked down to the floor thinking, wait, am I a good citizen? Am I doing what I need to do as a citizen? Or am I sleeping through being a citizen? When my wife and I, we have 8 kids and 5 grandkids, and when we started taking our kids to schools and we were carefully picking the right schools, the right teachers, for the first few years, we would drop off our kids at school and go home. We were what I would call drop-off parents. And then we started getting more concerned and more aware of what was going on in classrooms. And so my friend Rick McCloskey and I ended up being on a board of a private school and trying to financially get it going. But we stopped being drop-off parents, and we started showing up, volunteering, joining the board, helping with fundraising. Totally different experience than being a drop-off parent. Well, I believe that hundreds of millions of American citizens are completely asleep. They have no idea. I went into the ballot box in the polling booth in Missouri when I moved to Missouri in 2020. the election was in 2022. There were 40 names on the ballot. I literally didn't know a single thing about any candidate. I'd only lived there a few months. There's no newspaper coverage. It's a very rural area that I live in, 500 square miles, 8,000 population. I was embarrassed that I had no clue who I was voting for, what they said on any issue. Now, AI by the end of this year could potentially, with enough funding and enough support and enough paying customers and enough inertia, AI by the end of this year, coming up to the 2024 election, could allow every one of you to create a personal voter scorecard. You could list the issues you care about most at the school board level in the AI system. You could then list the issues you care about at the state level. And a lot of stuff's been kicked back to the states thanks to the recent Supreme Court rulings. So the state is making really important decisions. And then what do you care about at the federal level in your federal elections? And as you stack rank those issues and weight them and say, 70% of my vote is on this policy, 20% on this one, and 10% on this one, guess what AI could do for you? It could go out and analyze not only the words of all the candidates, but also their actions, their track history, and come back with a scorecard for you. But you might not trust the score, but it will also bring links to things they've said. So in the automation, we'll score it, and then you could spend an hour and listen to every single thing that your candidates for office have said for or against the issues you care about. That's 1,000 times easier than today, where hardly any of us know what people have said on any issue or how they voted. So there's 3 stages of transparency that I hope Citizen Portal can lead to in the coming decade. The first stage is what you're seeing right now. Let's take every recording in government, transcribe it, make it searchable, and queryable by AI. Okay, that's what's happening now. There's a second stage, though, that I think is super important. In 2015, I was working for Gallup in Washington, D.C. I wasn't on the polling side, but they were the inventor of political opinion polling in the 1930s. Dr. George Gallup invented random sample political polling. And Gallup's company mission includes finding out what the will of the people is. They've been doing this for 80 plus years now. Well, former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich is one of 24 brilliant people that are advisors to Gallup. They're called senior advisors. There's Nobel Prize winners like Danny Kahneman, Angus Deaton, economists, psychologists, and former people in government. Newt Gingrich and I had 10 or so phone calls and meetings together. And one time Newt said to me, he and President Clinton, can you believe this, had 3 balanced budgets in the late 1990s. Like, that's astonishing that that was in our lifetime. 3 balanced budgets in the late 90s. Okay, but those 2 were policy wonks. And Newt Gingrich said to me, do you think AI will ever write better legislation than people? I didn't know anything about AI at the time. I'd been reading about it a little bit, but I'd never built it, I'd never used it. So we ended up getting a call with Sebastian Thrun, one of the greatest machine learning experts in the world. He was, at that time, he had started the Google Self-Driving Cars initiative. He had recorded 13,000 hours of car training data and then started teaching the AI how to drive. And we don't have perfect self-driving cars yet, but it's a big effort. They'll need billions of hours of data to train the AI. But Sebastian taught me and Newt Gingrich for an hour what it would take someday to have AI that could write better legislation than people. Now, I'm not suggesting that we have AI do our government for us, but AI could guide us when we're writing legislation, say, you have the potential of unintended bad consequences for this bill provision is 95%. Like, AI can get objective data from the BLS or from Gallup or from statistical sources and can start connecting the policies our legislators vote for with the outcomes that happen a year, 2, 3, 5 years later. And AI will be able to brilliantly process billions of data points and come back and say, probability, this is a really bad idea. Okay, so that's one stage of transparency that I hope to get to in the next couple years. We're going to get campaign funding data for every elected official in the United States, and then there's a company that has 50,000 FOIA requests per year to get spending data by every government jurisdiction down to the vendor level. Could you imagine if every check written by every government entity in the United States could be calculated and tallied by an AI, and then potentially connections between the donor class and the contract winning class? Like, what if corruption could be outed that way? More importantly, though, Citizen Portal would like to find every good program in the United States and celebrate the people who created it and try to spread those good ideas across the country. In the laboratories of democracy, there are wonderful people in public service doing amazing things. Let me give you 3 examples. In Texas, the lowest recidivism rate of any program in the United States, less than 5%. My friend Debbie Kratke runs a program for hundreds of ex-offenders to help them learn their personal talents and strengths, get a job that's subsidized by the government for 2 to 4 months, and after the 4-month subsidy is up, 83% of them keep their job and only less than 5% go back to prison. That program in Fort Worth, Texas has never been exported to any other city or county. I could give you 3 or 4 more examples, but I'm running short on time. The greatest transparency move in the United States that could totally change the course of history is something that emerged at a 2008 US Capitol hackathon sponsored by Facebook. I was there. I had a Facebook app with about 200 million, or about 100 and something million users. And I was there with hundreds of other people. We weren't coding, we weren't hacking, but we were brainstorming ideas to how to improve government. Now, if you have any engineers in your family, any software programmers, every time they write code, they check it into a repository. It's now called a Git repository. And every software line of code that is now built into that program that executes and runs all the software we all use is attributable to a person who checked that code in. Every line in software code is attributable to the engineer who wrote it. And if they wrote a bug and it crashed the program, everybody knows who wrote the bug that crashed the program. Do you know that not a single line of legislation, any bill that's ever written, nobody knows who wrote any of it in the United States of America? There has to be a Git repository for legislation. Every elected official has to check in the code that they write. Instead of lobbyists writing all the bills and getting them sliding in provisions, nobody knows who writes anything. There's no transparency and no accountability in our legislative process. That could change if Citizen Portal is successful with those first 2 stages of transparency. We hope to convince cities, counties, and states to create a Git repository for legal code so that software code, which runs beautifully and all of us live our lives on it, that we could have a similarly accountable, transparent system that everyone who we elect to office, who decides to put this bill in or put in this provision or change this phrase, we know who did it and why and when. And when things work, we celebrate the success, and when they fail, we vote them out of office. Let's create a government by the people, for the people, and of the people that is transparency, because our elected officials, we know what they're doing and saying, and instead of complete opaqueness, complete ignorance of who did what when. When these trillion-dollar bills are passed with thousands of lines of code and nobody knows what's in it, how can we live with that? That's ridiculous. AI can solve that problem, and a Git repository for legislation can solve that problem as well. All right, let's make this happen. All right. It's a co-creation process. I need all of you to communicate with us what you need the Citizen Platform to do for you. My brother Mark will talk to hundreds of you, I'm sure, but we need votes on what features and what content, and we want to, you need to be empowered. You need to tell us what you need, and I promise we'll do the best we can to deliver what you need. Thank you.
Is that not exciting? You know, I felt that same kind of excitement years ago when we met Paul, and he introduced us to, I think it was called InfoBase then, and it was exciting. You know, there was no such thing as internet then, so he was introducing something to us that would open up this world right in front of us with all this information of things you've never heard of before. And I remember he was just telling me, you know, how he just said, well, give me something. Tell me something you want us to look up. So I said, President Benson's talk to the Newquist breakfast. And he pulled it up. I wouldn't have thought he'd never heard, you know, where'd that come from? How did he get something like that? And it was so interesting to watch him and how that transpired. Then another thing that we had the privilege of doing was introducing David Barton to Paul. And you can imagine how excited David Barton was. Because again, back then, no internet. And all of you know David. And so the internet for David was his head, because he knows everything, you know. And he was so excited to see what Paul had done. And I was at a big conference in Washington, D.C., and and David was there, and I heard him talking to a big group of people about the most exciting thing that he had just been introduced to. And he says, you have to meet these young men from Utah. They are done something so amazing. So here you are today, and you're seeing this same young man who, after all these years, continues to do these wonderful things that he's done, just introduced to us something amazing. And I loved being part of his something amazing in the past, and I'm so grateful he's here today with us for something new, but something amazing again. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take the break now. You have a 15-minute break, and then you need to be back right on time because we have to go quickly. Because, you know, we're ending this day with this Senate panel and a pizza party. So we got to get everything else in first. So get back here, because I'm speaking next, and I'm going to be really insulted if the room is just half of you are here when it's my turn. So please come back in 15 minutes.